And if anyone else joins in, then they'll just join in late.
And
but this will be on YouTube. I'll put the disclaimer here. So, guys, thank you for coming on board to the seminar. Hopefully you do get a lot out of today. Now, at any point, if you do have any questions in regards to the wonderful Clara, who will be presenting today's seminar, please just ask them in the Q&A section. But what we must reiterate is that this is a very sensitive topic, and this webinar alone is just for informational purposes only. So if you struggle with anything discussed in today's webinar, please do contact your local clinical psychologist, therapist, GP, you name it. It is not us. So take everything from this seminar is to be taken just as information and advice. So Clara, over to yourself.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today, guys. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. So again, as Vaughan kind of outlined, it is quite a sensitive topic, and I'll do my best to cover it with the evidence that we know to date. But as we already said, kind of if anything screams out to you, if there are any red flags, please do contact your GP or ask us if you want a bit more direction as to who to go to. I do get really nervous when I do these types of things. So if at any point I am talking really fast, just type it in the chat box and I'll slow down. But hopefully it'll give me enough time to cover everything that I'd like to cover. And as Vaughan said, if you've got any questions, just let us know. So the aim of today, oh God, I'm already starting. The aim of today is basically to help anyone who's listening as a coach or as a competitor understand how bodybuilding, body image, and disordered eating relate to each other, kind of how they show up together, to explain some of the research underpinning why these things show up all the time together, to explain some of the body image and disordered eating considerations that competitors should bear in mind, and that coaches should bear in mind too. And just to say here that when I refer to competitors, I also mean anyone who is starting off a fitness journey, anyone who is in a fitness journey. I'm just making it specific to bodybuilding, but really this stuff could, it covers all grounds. And also to provide anyone who's listening with some practical prompts to kind of what to do if any of these things resonate with you, or if you find any of it important or you'd like to read into it a bit more. So again, another disclaimer. The aim of the webinar is not to provide advice in replacement of a doctor, to encourage coaches to work with people who have clinical eating disorders either, or to encourage anyone listening to try and sort themselves out. And I say that with quotation marks, because that is definitely not what you should do. So now that that's out the way, let's start talking a bit about the evidence. So we know that bodybuilding, body image, and disordered eating are topics that come up all the time together, but there seems to be a massive amount of confusion as to why that is. We get questions all the time from athletes, from competitors, simply interested in competing, but who are quite concerned about the potential of them then developing an eating disorder off the back of competing. So that shows that there's a lack of understanding, for one, as to how eating disorders develop, but also a lack of understanding of what things can be done to help manage those disordered eating patterns in the journey. Nonetheless, it's really important to highlight that overall, physique-based sport athletes do have a much higher risk of developing disordered eating patterns and eating disorders, just off the back of the importance that is placed on appearance in that specific sport. In some sports, appearance or physique or being leaner can also help your performance, but also there's a greater risk for people who have a perceived pressure from their sport to look leaner. Now, obviously, bodybuilding is all about the physique. You don't win shows for being a good person. You don't win shows for dieting harder, for doing more cardio, for eating less. It's all based on the physique. So already we're coming into a sport that has a really, really high embedded risk for developing disordered eating patterns. And on top of that, dieting and losing weight overall, both in adolescence, throughout adulthood, and in adulthood too, presents with a greater risk of developing an eating disorder or disordered eating patterns, because dieting and losing weight implicitly requires a person to place more emphasis on and pay more attention to what they're eating, to their body image. And over time, if that's not managed, if there aren't sort of management techniques in place, that can very quickly develop into a negative perception of the self, and ultimately lead to disordered eating patterns and a negative body image. So firstly, I think it's really important to understand what poor body image sounds and looks like. And this can be really different to each person. I guess what makes poor body image something clinical or something to be overly concerned about is when it starts to interfere with a person's ability to do their day-to-day tasks. So when the level of preoccupation with the way that you look stops you from being able to concentrate on something that you're doing, stops you from being able to focus on work, stops you from being able to socialize. And what that might look like is really negative language that you use to describe yourself, always putting yourself down, never allowing yourself to take a compliment. It also looks like someone's self-worth being completely inseparable from their perceived body appearance. So I am only good enough when I look like this. I will be happy when I achieve this physique goal. And I am only worthy of people's love and attention if I look and present to myself in a certain way. Obviously, poor body image also sounds like using really derogatory terms, such as disgusting, horrible, greedy, fat, Megan, I am such a fucking this is that, or I'm never enough either. So just some things that you might hear yourself say, or that if you're a coach, you might hear your athletes say, whether that is directly to you or in conversation between other people. And again, something else or another way that poor body image might present is when the person shows a really like disproportionate focus on the way that they look. So constantly body checking, constantly kind of looking at their shoulders, looking at their legs, whatever it might be for them, that is like a trigger area for them. Or on the opposite end, completely avoiding looking at themselves. And that might be for your average person, not looking at the mirror when they're getting changed, not feeling comfortable taking your clothes off in front of your partner if you have a partner, or avoiding check-ins with your coach, or being quite dodgy around that, or not really kind of addressing those types of things. And then again, some other behaviors like pinching your different parts of your body to see how much fat or how much skin is on it. Things like body checking. So every time you're in front of a mirror, lifting your top up to see if your abs are still there, even though you've maybe had 5 meals that day and you're obviously not going to look as lean as you do in the morning. And then also using language, moral language attached to food. So saying, oh, I had a really good day, or I had a really bad day. I had some good food, I had some bad food. So those are just different ways that they might look like for different people. And some of these might show up at the same time in isolation, or you might display some symptoms and not others. An important thing to understand is sort of why do people experience poor body image? Why does this start to show up? And if we look back at sort of bodybuilding, it often comes down to us constantly asking ourselves questions that don't have an answer to, such as, why are my delts so small? Or why do my biceps not seem to grow? Also negative comparisons to other people, such as, why does that person look leaner than I do at the same body weight? Why is that person coping so well with their off season and I seem to be struggling so much? Why does this person have bigger delts than me when they're far younger than me and they've been training for less time? And then also negative reflections on the past, which might be, oh, if I hadn't mucked about with my food and my training for, my whole life, I'm putting blame on the last 25 years of my life, I would not be in such a bad position now. If I had done this or that, this would be different now. So kind of dwelling on those things in relation to our body image can keep that negative talk going massively. Again, the constant checking and the reassurance seeking is something that keeps that going, because if you're checking your abs every single day, I can guarantee you that you will start to notice more and more things. I mean, even if you just stop and look at your finger for a moment, and the more you look at the finger, the more things you start to see that if you just weren't paying any attention, you just wouldn't see them. So constantly checking your body will inevitably lead to you being more concerned with your appearance. And then making negative predictions about yourself or about the future, such as overestimating the impact of something such as if you've just finished your prep and you are struggling to sort of eat to hunger cues because your hunger hormones are all over the shop, and you go off plan, you have more food than you were maybe hungry for, and you start to completely overestimate the negative impact that's going to have. You think, oh, I'm going to gain 5 kilos, I'm a fucking fat fuck, I'm going to balloon, and you start just perpetuating that negative, constant negative talk. And then, of course, like in bodybuilding, the existing dieting and appearance focus that exists within the sport is going to keep that body image focus constant. So making sure that it's not always negative is going to be really, really important.
Just about that what you just said there about that sort of negative body image. Remember back to prep last year? Yeah,
exactly. Which is why having management tools and having someone who can keep you accountable to these things is so important, because had that negative self-talk like grown arms and legs and not been nipped in the bud in the moment, that would have been incredibly detrimental.
How did it feel from your end? It would be a good idea to tell people, because I'll say from my end first that Clara checked in every single day and thought that she wasn't leaner and thought that she was getting worse. And from my end, I was like, well, here's a photo comparison. But maybe perhaps sharing like your mindset that you were in the time would be quite valuable for anyone who's maybe not prepped before.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that when you've been prepping for that long, again, you've been constantly, if I just go back, you have been constantly checking your body, constantly checking in with your coach, to an extent reassurance seeking. So almost like the things that you need to do to make sure that your prep is successful are contributing to the potential of your body image, of yourself, like being quite negative. So the way that constant checking in and reassurance helped me was it just allowed me to, I've checked in the morning, my coach said that all is good, therefore I no longer need to keep checking for the rest of the day. I've checked in once, that's the feedback they've given me, that is all I need to be able to move on with my day. Now, if I didn't have that, I would perhaps start to question myself. I would perhaps start to check my body constantly after every meal, after every rep, after every cardio session, and that would just get into your head, and that would just, again, contribute towards those negative predictions like, oh, I think I ate too much today. Oh my goodness, if my weight changes tomorrow, I'm going to have to make 100 changes. So actually being able to nip it in the bud and being reassured by that one point in time where you check, that's what facilitates, or that's what enables you to move forward. The next thing I want to talk about is sort of why bodybuilding can potentially lead to negative body image and to disordered eating patterns. So if we look at the sort of cycle and we start off up here with the passion for bodybuilding, most people, that's how they end up in the sport. They have a passion for training, they love exercise, and they've been doing it for long enough, and bodybuilding's become popular enough that they say, actually, I want to step it up a notch. I want to do something different. I'm going to challenge myself. I'm deciding to prep. So everyone has a first prep, whether that's for a photo shoot or an actual competition, or your first ever formal dieting phase. So you start working with a coach, and your coach, oh, that's really annoying me there. Your coach is unaware of the potential risk that dieting for a long period of time can impose. They're not aware of things like negative self-talk because they might have never experienced it themselves. And as such, that risk is not managed throughout the prep. And at the end, because you've probably been posting about your weight loss journey, you've been posting about your prep, people are giving you loads of praise, you're feeling amazing because you look clean, but you also feel like death. Eventually, your self-esteem and the way that you feel about yourself becomes super contingent upon your body image. And what I mean by that is that you basically allow the way that you look to be dictated, the way that you feel about yourself to be dictated by the way that you look constantly, and there's nothing else that contributes towards your self-esteem. And that's really important, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. And ultimately what that means is that when it comes to having to let go of that lean physique that you've been building up for so long in the extremes of bodybuilding or for a photo shoot prep, when it comes to having to let go of that, it's really fucking difficult because your self-esteem has been super tied in to the way that you look. And now you need to let go of the way that you look. So making sure that you're building your self-esteem and attaching other things to it throughout the prep process is going to be super important, because otherwise you'll come to the end of prep and the minute that coach says it's done, time to push calories up, time to reduce cardio, it will be incredibly, incredibly distressing. In saying that though, people that sort of follow this pattern or end up with disordered eating patterns through the cycle tend to find it easier to sort of overcome it with the right strategies put in place. It's quite different when someone enters the bodybuilding world with an existing disordered eating psychopathology. So what that means is that they may have had a previous eating disorder that they've not fully recovered from. They're still using exercise as a mechanism to control calories. They're very, very controlling of their food. And they end up discovering bodybuilding where that eating becomes socially acceptable. It's praise, you're hardcore dieter, don't miss a session, weigh everything out to the gram. Yeah, that's what we're all about. We're hardcore here. But essentially what those behaviors, all it is doing is just masking an underpinning and an underlying eating disorder. That's already there. That's not being dealt with. And what that then means is that it's all quote unquote fun and games during the prep process, because what you're doing is what you're supposed to be doing. But when it comes to finishing prep, you're completely unable to exit. And these people who already have an existing disordered eating psychopathology are at a far greater risk of that becoming clinical and that becoming really impairing their life to a large extent. And these are the people that are really likely to need clinical support, and that ultimately a level 3 coach really shouldn't be working with, not alone, certainly not alone. So I just want to hand over to you guys a little bit to talk about your personal experience with body dissatisfaction, food focus during prep, outside of prep, self-esteem, food guilt, and that can be about your personal experiences, Vaughan and Ali, in your own preps and your own bodybuilding journeys, but also anything that you've seen with clients. So Vaughan, if you maybe want to kickstart.
Yeah, I mean, I could say two things, and it could be speaking about my very first prep. I mean, to go way back to the very start, the reason I started bodybuilding was because I was mostly insecure, and probably, even though I was confident, lacked confidence in how I, my self-worth was based on how I looked, right? So I thought, fuck, I'm not big, I'm shit. So decided to start bulking, start growing, but that really feeling never really went away until a point where you just kind of look in the mirror and you go, oh shit, I'm kind of big, and that's cool. But it meant that at the very start of the journey, and I think I'm saying this from a guy's point of view because it's not often spoken about, I spent a lot of time on Instagram comparing against, say, other guys that were doing physique competitions or bodybuilding competitions and saying, you know what, fuck, why don't I have delts like that? Why don't I have a chest like that? And so but as us guys, we give off this persona that everything's all good, it's sick, bro, and that we are sort of untouchable in that sense. And I'm sure that many bodybuilders out there will admit that at some point they did feel like that. And if they say they don't, they're an absolute liar, right? It's one of the reasons why, right? It's a natural feeling. So that is kind of in relation to bodybuilding. I wouldn't say that that's still around. It's just a case of always wanting to get a little bit better. But at the very start, that's certainly why I felt. In regards to food focus, well, we only need to go back to my first prep, which I know Indra's not in the chat right now, but I would get a refeed on a Saturday. I would have planned that from the previous Monday, and it's all I would have thought about all week. And I really got irritable, angry. Oh, hey, Indra, I didn't see you. I'm sure I was looking at the attendee list and didn't see you, but hey, she's there. I spent the whole week planning on what I would eat on the Saturday. Indra was my Monday 7 a.m. client, and we would chat both because Indra would always get released on a Saturday about exactly what we would do and what we would eat and what we were like. I was like, oh, this week I'm going to have some chicken burgers, and then I'm going to have some chips, and I'm going to have a Pop-Tart. And at the time, it was the norm, and that's what I thought it was supposed to be. It's only when I look back now, I'm like, fucking hell, I was a miserable bastard. Right, but I'm sure Ali will get in here in a few minutes and talk about his food focus, which way worse than mine. But it was really like after that prep, that really made me a robot with food, because I was like, I never want food to control me like that again, ever. And it's not. In fact, it's the opposite. I absolutely hate it. And then just before I pass to Ali, I would say your point on, I think that females have a much harder time from a coaching perspective reversing out of prep than guys. Guys, I'm not saying it's easy, but guys very much have very little attachment to being lean from my experience, because we are so, perhaps, okay, let's face it, obsessed with getting bigger. Right? As bodybuilders, we all are, right, to a certain extent, but there's something very very poignant about, just as a guy wanting to just get fucking huge, and I'm just going to get fucking sick, you know what I mean? And I think that certainly is in my mind why I have zero attachment to being lean, because I like feeling big. Like I don't, when I'm down stage lean, I don't like it. Yeah, it might look great, but it just feels small. Right?
Yeah.
But there's nothing better when you're maybe not at your peak off season weight, maybe like a few kilos away from it. You're at your strongest. You don't get a fucking lower back pump walking up a hill. That's probably the best, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, in regards to, you put image. I got a D at higher English. I can't even pronounce that word.
Contingent.
Right.
When your body image is associated to your self-esteem and your self-worth.
Yeah, and at the time, at the start of the journey, how I looked, you look back on Instagram, me and Ali wore vests, right? We thought we thought we were big bastards, and we thought we were bigger back then than we do now. We probably feel smaller now, but I don't think it really. I don't really think we thought we were Billy Big Bollocks by any means. Maybe Ali did. Ali's a bit different than I am, but I never necessarily. Maybe after about a year into the journey, when I realised, oh, actually, this works, all that sort of negative sort of image of how I felt about myself went away. Because I sort of compared back to the start, and I was like, I'm getting better, I'm getting better. And I just stopped following all the guys that I was like, oh, I want to be, or look like them. I was like, in a few years, they'll be fucking want to look like me. That's how I just flipped it. In regards to food guilt, massive for females.
Yeah.
And I'm not being sexist for that. It's just that females tend to feel a lot more guilty when they overeat because they can't necessarily handle as many calories. Whereas I often feel with a lot of guys in bodybuilding, it's like they think it's a big joke when they like binge post like show or whatnot. They're like, oh, I'm such a fat fucker, and who ate all the pies and that, and they sort of try and brush it off. And it seems again that relates back to them just wanting to get huge and massive and not really care. Whereas as a female, there's this sort of persona, and there shouldn't be, of they want to be lean all year round, so that when they binge a little bit and they feel bloated or uncomfortable, it then leads to them, as you said, negative self-talk. That's what I've experienced a lot, and I think that the post-prep sort of phase, shall we call it, is just as important as the last phase in prep. For as a coach, coach, like supporting your client, you cannot have a client check in every single day for 8 weeks and then go right back to once a week. You just can't do it.
No.
Especially
I think it's so important to have those conversations, because I think that a lot of females, like we're really, females competitors in general, we're quite bad for showcasing the glitz and the glam of show day. And by the way, if you've never competed on show day, you stink because you've not showered. No one showered, and you smell of tan, and it's gross. But we showcase the glitz and the glam when in fact there's so much, struggle getting to there, but also struggle afterwards. And that's so, like, it's just not highlighted. And I wish kind of in hindsight, I wish I'd perhaps done a better job of showcasing like I've definitely overeaten today. I feel quite uncomfortable. These are my emotions, these are my feelings, and just being able to be quite a bit more open about it, because I do think that it's something that females have a lot of shame around, right? And they think that they're weirdos because they think that they're the only ones that are having strong urges to overeat after prep. But yeah, Ali, do you want to talk us through your experience?
Ali, tell me the KFC story.
I'll get to that story after the first bit. But with the body dissatisfaction, I think I've got a sort of opposite end on that. So I'm the same as Vaughn, where me and Vaughn went to school together, if anyone doesn't know, and we were both very skinny. So I trained always for that reason. I was tiny, yeah. But I think, like, I always speak about building your body as being creative, but one of the problems that can come with that is you'll never be big enough, you'll never be strong enough. And certainly with a few guys I've worked with over the last year, with females it tends to be as they get leaner. With some guys, as you start to lean them down, they find it really uncomfortable, because I suppose in their subconscious they feel that all their muscles going away and things like that. And I have seen that over the last year, especially with some clients just speaking about it, where they might have been relatively skinny growing up, and then they might have built to a size they're happy with, but obviously a bit higher body fat. When you start to pull them back, they find it uncomfortable. And I think it doesn't get spoke about as much with guys, because obviously everyone's macho and they want to kind of hide it away. So it is a big thing, especially considering we're in an industry where we always preach, like, you can be better, you can do more. And that's totally true, but you've got to, self-love's important. So you've got to be, so thankfully, I think me and Vaughn are in the same position where we are happy with our physiques, but it doesn't mean we're not trying to push it to be better. But I think some people can miss they don't congratulate themselves for how far they've came. Definitely. And I do see that a lot, especially guys who can be very competitive with themselves. So I do see that a lot. With the food focus, so can I just say, first of all, if there is anyone in the chat who has really struggled with food focus, I am not saying I have. Mine was so Vaughn coached me last year. My relationship with food was relatively good. I get to about 3 weeks out. My entire hour cardio session on the Stairmaster was spent with me. Robin was asleep. Spent with me screenshotting photos of food and sending it to her. And I don't mean like one or two, I mean like hundreds. And what then became was, it was the build-up of everything. So when prep then finished, rather than me going for a meal with my girlfriend enjoying it, I went for a meal and overate. And that's probably for 3 weeks, I probably could not, I was probably hitting 6,500 calories a day on average. And obviously Vaughn will tell you, like, there was one day I was on the treadmill. I was going on holiday like 3 weeks later. I was on the treadmill and Vaughn was PTing, or I think he was in the staff room maybe. And I was texting him speaking about KFC, and he came out the staff room, walked over, and he said to me, "Ali, do you even like KFC?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." But my entire half an hour on a treadmill was filled with me putting ideas in my head about what I should be eating. And thankfully, from my point of view, after 3 weeks of just eating like an idiot, I kind of just rolled back into my normal day-to-day life. And that has actually made my food focus now, my relationship with food's a lot better. But up until last year, when I went out for a meal with my girlfriend, I was still calculating calories in my head. And I think it's something that, as you said, it just gets kind of breezed past. If you don't have the support system in prep, it can be very difficult. So, like, Vaughn will obviously tell you, like, we tell it in like a funny way, but obviously I had good people around me helping me, so it kind of just, I was cool with it. But there was days where I was literally with clients and I was getting agitated because I was thinking about what I was going to go eat, which we know is not how you want to do it.
No, definitely. And I think it's really important you highlighted that, is that I'll speak about this more in the next few slides, is how to make sure that kind of during prep and before and sort of after prep, that you're asking yourself some questions to make sure that these things don't become problematic, that it is kind of like, you know, your 3 week post show where your hunger hormones are sort of getting back into the swing of things, and having that support network that allows you to sort of exit that and not keep it going. So I'll move on to the next slide. Because I guess this is a more important part, the reason why some of you are here listening, if you are a coach, and it's understanding how we can make an impact. Now, if we have a client in front of us and they've come to us with an existing eating disorder psychopathology that we were perhaps not aware of, we maybe just didn't know how to spot the signs, and it, comes to the end of prep, they never disclosed an existing or previous eating disorder, the best thing we can do is refer them to their doctor or to a psychologist or to an eating disorder charity. Now, this doesn't mean that you should then inherently stop working with that client, because you've probably built a really good relationship with them throughout that time. And they might still need your support throughout that process. And there's nothing to say that if they start working with a clinician, that the work that they do with them cannot be then embedded into the coaching journey. It might just mean that the coaching journey is not about, training and calories. It's about whatever they're working on with that clinician. Obviously, what we're most likely to look at is this situation where we've got a client who's got a passion for bodybuilding. They choose to compete for the first time. They choose to diet for the first time for photo shoots to lose weight. And the things in green here are the areas that we can create an impact in. So mainly the first one, which is what we're all doing now, is educating ourselves a bit more on the risk. So it's important both for the clients to be aware of the potential risks associated to dieting, because then they'll know that if anything starts to worry them, that it's perhaps normal and that they can voice that to their coach. But it's really important for coaches to educate themselves too. And as I said before, you don't win shows. You can be a very good bodybuilder and be a shit person, which is why often we see that there's a lot of shit coaches, because they're just really good at bodybuilding and are looking good on stage and are winning shows. And they take on clients, they've got no education, no awareness, no interest in educating themselves either, that then a client starts to, see these patterns emerge in their behavior. They don't feel like they can communicate that to their coach. They don't have the education or the tools or the resources or the team around them. That risk is not managed during prep. And then, we end up with a disastrous situation, basically. So the places, as I said, that we can impact is that education piece, managing the risk throughout the prep process, before and after too, and then making sure that that self-esteem is built upon, and that there's more layers that are separate to the body image. So if you were in our webinar a few weeks ago where we spoke about how to get stage lean, this slide is from that webinar. And the first thing I wanted to highlight here in terms of managing that risk of body image preoccupation and food preoccupation is that should really start way before prep. When a client comes to you, you should really be asking them these questions, and they should be asking themselves these questions before entering a dieting phase, such as, am I too preoccupied with food? Can I go a day without tracking in my off season? If I do go through that day, am I super anxious because I don't know how much I'm eating? Am I overly controlling of the food that I'm taking in? So am I massively overestimating the calorie intake just to be safe? And am I confident in my ability to manage myself sensibly in a food environment? Or do I feel like I'll have a really strong urge to binge and overeat? And then equally, this is perhaps more so for the client, but making sure that you feel enough as a person before you start a dieting phase, assessing really how contingent your body, so your self-esteem is upon your body image, and really listening into your self-talk and seeing whether it's supportive of you or whether it is detrimental to you, because that's only going to get more difficult through the prep process, because as we know, as we said earlier, prep, dieting, physique sports are a risk for body image focus and for food preoccupation and disordered eating. So making sure that those things are in place before you even consider a prep is super important. Now, as a coach, there are quite a few things that you can start looking out for to make sure that your client doesn't get to a bad place where they do end up in high levels of distress associated to food, inability to control food, or in an inability to let go of food control. So some things that you can start to look at are their ability to embrace the off season. How do they respond to higher food? Do they get excited? Do they go like, oh, for God's sake, that's so much food, I'm so full? Or do they panic? And then do they like show really rigid avoidance behaviors around foods? Like if you say something like, oh, let's put in this meal if they follow a meal plan, do they freak out? Or do they use language that might suggest that they're likely to binge, or that they feel that they're at a higher risk of binging? Do they always explain and justify why their weight has gone up after an off-plan meal? And I know that I've done this for a really long time, and it's something that I've started to check myself for more. I'm getting better at it though, but because sometimes we do need that reassurance. But are we able to enjoy an off-plan meal and just understand that logically our body weight on a scale, gravity is going to be stronger the next day, and that our scale reading is going to be a bit higher? And then something important to look out for too is whether someone's mood and stress levels are associated to their daily body weight reading. So that's something that all these things are things that you can incorporate into your check-in system. So spending a bit more time developing a more comprehensive check-in system is really, really important, because that then allows you to pull these things apart as a coach and to see the signs before they become something more negative. And as I said, it's easy to be a good bodybuilder and it's hard to be a good coach, because looking at a big check-in sheet spreadsheet takes a lot of effort and a lot more time. Vaughan, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, I was saying that like 2 minutes ago, but I don't think you heard me. Like Clarazone. Can you go back on that last slide?
Yeah, sure. Let me.
Just because there's a couple of people that I know that are in here that I just want to reiterate this point, that as a coach, right, if you have a client that continually tries to, like, they try to justify to you why their weight goes up, just tell them they don't need to. You're the coach, and we've seen from all the data that we've collated that happens. It's not a bad thing that your body weight goes up and down every other day. It will. As a coach, I'd say, stop talking about it.
Yeah.
I'm always like, you don't need to tell me. I could see on your check-in sheet that you had your off-plan meal on that day. I know why it's went up. So then in the comment section, you don't need to tell me, oh, well, body went up on that day because I had my meal on it before. A good coach knows that. You know? You don't need to tell them. It was just to reiterate that, even if it is, whether it's to do with food or you're on your menstrual cycle or whatnot, a good coach, any one of you two and any other ones that are in the attendees that are coaches, will probably already have seen, right, actually, well, we know that every single time week before you start menstruating, you gain a kilo. We've seen that. And I've seen that over the past 20 weeks. Don't even constantly mention it. So what I was just meaning, that I don't say that to put someone down. I'm just like, take the stress away. It's cool.
I know, exactly. So no, that is really important that you highlighted that. I wanted to put in a mini disclaimer in here again, and we've already sort of touched upon it, but with all this information, as I said at the beginning, it's not to say that you can't feel happy and feel better when you lose weight, because more often than not, when you're losing weight and when you're going through any of these processes, like, you're accomplishing something huge. Like, you're changing the way that you live, you're being diligent, you're being disciplined with yourself, and you're really striving to achieve something so much bigger by completely changing your life. So it's okay to want to improve your appearance, and it's okay for you to feel better about yourself when you do improve your appearance to an extent. It's when that preoccupation starts to impact your day-to-day life negatively, that's when it becomes problematic. And that's what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about if you want to lose weight and you start feeling great about yourself, oh my God, you've got disordered body image. Like, that's not what I'm on about. So just as a mini disclaimer there again. The next thing, obviously, I wanted to touch upon is, well, what can we do? There's some amber flags. I've started to notice some things. Where can I go from here? So there's a lot of evidence around this, and I don't have the time or the scope to cover it all, but if anyone's interested in the literature, just let me know. But one of the main things that we see, and that we've started to see more and more, is that self-affirming kindness and being kind to yourself reduces and allows people to regulate the self-disgust that they feel towards themselves and increase their self-acceptance. Now, lots of big words. What this evidence means is that in studies where they've done specific interventions with people who had a low perceived body image and a high level of self-disgust towards themselves, irrespective of their actual body mass. So controlling for those factors. Actually, when you ask them to engage in kindness towards themselves, and like force them, encourage them to practice self-affirmation, that then leads to them increasing their self-acceptance and reducing their self-disgust, which means that they can be happy with the way that they are now, even though they can understand that there's still room to improve. So that's some really, really important evidence, because what that shows us is that actually, if we start to see that we're overly preoccupied with the way that we look, and that our food focus is becoming increasingly larger, if we start to be kind towards ourselves and accept that these things are perhaps normal and be kind to ourselves rather than bully ourselves, that actually we can move past those and almost use them as a tool for self-improvement, because that self-improvement will come from a place of love and a place of kindness and compassion towards yourself, which I know might sound really airy-fairy, but the evidence is pretty concrete, and this isn't just for females, it also applies to males. So something that you can do is develop a list of mantras that you can go over and affirm to yourself, and they don't have to be crazy huge. It doesn't have to be like, oh my god, I love myself, I'm fucking great. It can be super, super small things like, I'm so happy and grateful for my body because it allows me to be there for my family. Even just something like that, where you are telling yourself that you appreciate your body for what it does for you, can facilitate that kindness, that self-acceptance, that then reduces that level of self-disgust that you might feel towards yourself within the stage. And by self-disgust, that can also mean negative body image, negative self-talk. So yeah, appreciating what your body does for you is a huge...
Clara, can I jump in on that as well?
Go for it,
So we say this a lot, obviously, when we're speaking about things as well, but this ties in perfectly with when people are looking to diet for shows and they are seeking comfort from Instagram. So rather than focusing on themselves and focusing on themselves getting on stage, they're constantly looking for likes on Instagram, things like that. And we know that your journey is for yourself. Yes, some of us are competitive and we want to win, but if you get an extra 20 likes on Instagram, things like that, this can be really detrimental, especially what Vaughn was saying earlier, if you're constantly comparing yourself to other people on Instagram, when realistically speaking, those people don't know who the hell you are. So it doesn't matter. And that ties in very well with that.
Yeah. And it definitely goes into that next point, is that, like I was saying earlier, separating your self-worth from the way that you look. So a healthy promotion of your identity outside of that sport or outside of that goal has been shown to help prevent and reduce the incidence of eating disorders and disordered eating. So what that means is that making sure that you're nurturing other aspects of who you are throughout that journey is going to be a massive factor. Now, we do speak a lot about making sure that you're surrounding yourself by the right people. But even within that, I think it's really important to say that, you know, you need to make sure that you're not just defining yourself or equating yourself to you as a bodybuilder. Now, obviously, the higher you go up the ranks, when you become pro and whatnot, that can be a bit harder. But making sure that you're doing things outside of the sport, or that you're interacting with people, and that you see yourself as more than just a bodybuilding competitor is really important, which is why it's great that a lot of competitors are also coaches, because that sort of gives them something else to focus on. And it's not just, I'm just a bodybuilder, and if I fail at bodybuilding, I'm nothing. And I guess that ties into the fact that often when we prep and when we get so into this journey, we very much tie in who we are to being lean, which is why then when we are no longer lean, we think, oh shit, like I feel crap about myself because that's who I am, and I don't want to let go of that. And it's really, really difficult. So with your client, for example, to help them develop other aspects of their identity, it can be a really interesting exercise to do, can be to set value-based goals. So asking them what their top, 3-4 values are, and, setting goals around those values. So if they really value personal development, focusing on that personal development, checking in with them on that personal development throughout the journey can really help contribute towards not just focusing on the way that they look, even if that is ultimately what you're trying to achieve together. Something else that you can do, I've got all my notes here. As a person, as an athlete, is considering, your top qualities as a person. And Amelia Thompson put this really nicely in a recent podcast, where she said, if you were to write down on a piece of paper the top 10 qualities of your most favorite person ever, probably not a single one of them would be associated to the way that they look. So why should that be the case for you? And moving on to a bit more specifically, things that athletes can do, or that you can do if you're entering a fitness journey, photo shoot prep, whatnot. If you realize that you are a little preoccupied with your body and food, and if you want to make sure that you're managing what you can in the process, a couple of things that you can do is start noticing how much you focus on food and on your appearance. So like Ali, if you realize that your phone is full of screenshots of food, maybe start asking yourself, how helpful is that? If you find that you're following all these food accounts on Instagram, really ask yourself, like, how is this helping me right now? Why am I so focused on food? And speak to someone about it. There's no shame in being food focused, but just speak to someone about it. And same with your appearance focus. Ask that difficult question. Like I said there, make sure that you're not just focusing on bodybuilding, that your life is still there as best as possible, especially towards the back end of a prep. You can practice mindful eating, which really helps reduce the incidence of disordered eating, because what it does is it forces you to slow down, to pay attention to what you're eating. And this is especially helpful for people who struggle with binge eating, which is one of the most common disordered eating patterns that we see in competitors. Whether they then purge or not is a different story, but the binge eating is a huge thing. So implementing mindful eating in your off season, during your prep, and as you exit prep can be an incredibly helpful strategy. And it doesn't have to be super hippie, like sit down, close your eyes, feel the broccoli on your tongue. Like, it doesn't have to be anything crazy like that. It can be something as simple as eating without any distractions, or timing your meals, making sure that it's taking you 10 minutes to eat a meal, which when you're on prep can be really fucking difficult, because your meals get progressively smaller and you get progressively hungrier. So just taking your time with those types of things. Listening into your self-talk and voicing your self-talk. So speaking up and sharing your experiences. And what you'll realize is that you're not alone. Like, most people have gone through something similar, or they'll be able to relate, or at least they'll be able to understand and show empathy, which is super important for coaches. So comment there about me being vegan and liking broccoli. That is true, but it can be anything. And this is a sort of really important part that I'd like to highlight, is that if you're a coach, it's really important for you to be just good at empathetically listening to your clients, and providing a space within that coaching journey where they do not feel shame to speak about these things. And the way that starts is by you as a coach being able to speak about these things quite openly, and being able to say to someone, look, if we're starting a prep, these are the things that are likely going to happen. So I want you to let me know if you start, if your head's not in a good place, I want you to let me know. You need to text me. You need to communicate that with me. Because if the client knows that they can do that, they won't be embarrassed to let you know that they've overeaten. Obviously, there's a thin line between, it's not the same to experience binge eating associated to disordered eating patterns, or to overeat because you just simply you're developing those habits and you just still don't have that discipline inbuilt yet. Contextual sensitivity, but we know what we're talking about here. And I think it's really important as a coach to not be scared to ask your clients a direct question and just say, look, are you struggling with disordered eating? Is this something that's worrying you? And not being scared to have that conversation is really important. And the only reason I think coaches are scared is because they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the language to talk about these things. So coming onto something like this, doing additional reading is really, really important. As I said earlier, being able to outline the journey and the scope of your practice to your client is super important. If your client, if you realize that your client's got what looks like a clinical eating disorder, telling them that you've got no idea how to solve that is okay. And it's actually the responsible and thing that you should be doing, because you shouldn't really be working with someone directly to help them solve that. They should have clinical support if they feel comfortable with that. And if they want you there on the journey with them, that's amazing, and you can support them, but you shouldn't be taking on that responsibility, because it's not your job and it's not your role, and it's quite irresponsible. And yeah, start to talk about it. Start sharing your experience. Start being okay with having these conversations, whether you're a female coach. Being okay with disclosing some of your personal experiences with your clients can make you quite far more approachable. They'll listen in and they'll know that they can talk about these things with you. Obviously, make sure that you keep that professional boundary, but just be open about your own experience, and don't make someone feel weird for these experiences that they might have had. And yeah, just make sure that you are implementing some of these tools if they feel useful. And as always, just reminding the client that in the bodybuilding journey, the dieting phase is such a small part of it, and help them build and help them see the bigger picture, that it's not just about looking good on stage, it's about what you take out of bodybuilding, and the things like the personal development, the discipline, the challenge that you're allowed to, that you can embrace and that you do embrace in a journey like that. That should be the focus of it. As I said, things that you should definitely not be doing as a coach is telling your client to just get over it, telling them to have more willpower, because disordered eating is not about willpower. As I said, keep working with them if it's beyond your scope of practice. Pretend it's not happening, and maybe consider whether dieting is a good idea for that client now. It's more likely that if they're constantly overeating, or they can't manage themselves around food, or actually they can't get out of that mindset, that you really need to take a stance and say, no, this is not productive right now. And just to sort of wrap up, if you want to learn a bit more, or if these are things that you'd like to discuss, BEAT is the British Eating Disorder Charity. They're amazing. They have so much information on their website. They've even got a phone line, an anonymous phone line that you can call and speak to someone about your worries, and they'll be able to guide you and inform you far better. But also there's this really, really great website called getselfhelp.co.uk. It's literally got hundreds and hundreds of PDFs, worksheets for pretty much any single mental health issue that exists. And it provides us with some really practical tools, activities that you can do yourself in your own time, or that you as a coach can scan through and see if something it might be useful for your client. And there's a lot for disordered eating, for binge eating, for anorexia. So if that's something that you're interested in exploring a little bit more, I definitely would encourage you to look at these websites, because they're free. There's so much information there. And it just allows you to sort of explore these things. And as a coach, for example, see what can be done, what types of questions you could be asking. They highlight that quite well, but also as a client, or if you don't have a coach and these are some of your concerns, spending some time on these websites and looking at, these are maybe some of the things that I can implement. But of course, never in replacement of seeking medical advice if you do feel that that's what you need. So I think I've spoken for long enough. I will hand over to Vaughan and Ali if you guys have anything else to add. And if anyone's got any questions, you can pop that in the chat right now.
Before, whilst people type questions and whatnot, I think that it would be quite fitting to give coaches a rough idea of what we do with regards to sort of just coming out of a prep. Because you covered pretty much everything, but one thing it can be talking about it, but actually experiencing it and taking someone through it can be two different things. So number one, I would say, is that if someone has spoken to you every day for 8 weeks, continue to speak to them every day after, right? Whether it's just checking up on them, asking how they were, congratulating them, just saying, hey, how's your energy levels today? How are you feeling? Whatnot. It can just give them that reassurance, because after someone is prepped for a show, there's a massive low, or a photo shoot or whatever it is, right? There's a massive low anyway, because there's a big pipe. And then often what they'll do is they've got mad hunger, and then to just get that euphoric high feeling, they'll reach for more food. So what I tend to do is, like we did, Clara, we maybe didn't have daily check-ins, right? But I was just like, listen, if you're hungry, if body weight drops, right, I said, well, let me know. And we would have like food increases, strategic food increases every sort of like, it was maybe between 4 to 7 days for like a good, I want to say 3-week period.
Yeah, for sure.
It's got super, super high. So what I would just say to clients is that in this first initial phase, like as soon as they finish driving, listen, this will be harder than the last few weeks of prep. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm just like, you can really nail this, or you could really fuck things up. I said, either way, don't worry, I'll be by your side. We'll be fine. But I was like, if you just stick with me, stick through it, and get through the hard days, I promise you, you'll be eating so much food within such a short period of time, right? Because Clara, where did your calories get up to?
2,400 on a leg day just before lockdown, and that was pretty quick, like within 5 months.
Clara's like barely even 5 foot, right? She's on that many calories. So it can show you how quickly it can happen. But then I would say that anyone's first prep after it, you will overeat, you will binge and whatnot. It is okay. But if it is a coach, right, we do video check-ins. And what you maybe see on Instagram was when a client maybe puts up me doing one, I often bring up their very first photo they ever sent me. I did this to Clara the other day, right?
Yep.
Because maybe perhaps they'll be 2 weeks post-show and they've gained, okay, let's be realistic, they've maybe gained 7 kilos. Because that can happen, right? Which is over a stone. I always will say, listen, I know you've gained 7 kilos and you're feeling a bit watery, you're feeling a bit bloated, but this, let's say it was Ali. This Ali on the left would love to look like that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh shit, yeah, and I think it just gives them a bit more perspective on things, and just continuing to refer back about that really helps. And another strategy I would say is, you mentioned about me as a coach, like being open and asking questions. Like as a coach, do not feel guilty about asking someone if they've overeaten, because I remember a few years ago being like, I feel like this is really cheeky if I ask this client if they're overeating because they're not dropping body fat. But see now, like someone checks in, I'm like, these are off. Like, what have you been eating? Not in a bad way, but just like, I'm like, look, logically, we've hit our steps, we've hit our cardio, we've hit our training, we've hit this, we've hit that. The only reason we're not mobilising body fat is because we're over consuming calories. Whether that's coming from maybe perhaps you're not tracking a latte that you're having from McDonald's every single morning, or a couple of biscuits that you think you're getting away with, we're not in a position where that we can continue to mobilise body fat. And again, I think that one of the panic moments I had a couple of years ago, and I wouldn't have done this a couple of years ago, would be pull a client out of a show or a shoot. I would do that now in a heartbeat, right? Mm-hmm. But I just felt scared, being like, oh no, they want to do it. But as a coach, you kind of realise that it's how you go about it.
Definitely.
Right?
I think, yeah.
Someone's like, say, 8 weeks out, and as a coach, you just know in their head, there's no way they're going to be ready. I would say, listen, at this point, in this position, I don't feel that you'll be at your absolute best for the chosen show or the chosen shoot. What I would recommend that we potentially do is aim for like a later shoot, a later date, or if they are perhaps, as you said, Clara, there's just no way that they're going to be ready, or they're having food problems or whatnot. I'd say, listen, at this point in your life, at this moment, it's okay that you aren't absolutely shredded right now, and it's all right that you don't that perhaps we're not going to get there now. It doesn't mean you won't get there in the future, but for this current moment, it's not good for your mental health. All the things you spoke about. For us to continue this, I'd recommend we up your calories and get you to a maintenance point, get you good with food, and as you said, perhaps refer out. Ali, say something.
No, I was just going to say if anyone had any questions, but Clara's covered everything, I think.
Yeah, I just want to highlight there that it is so important, like as a coach, to be able to have these conversations, but also as a client to be able to expect that level of care from your coach. And I think that it's important to be quite open. And I know, like, for example, when I started working with you on this 2.5 years ago, one of the first things I said to you was like, look, this is my previous experience. I am currently in the process of helping myself recover through self-help, because I was not in a clinical state from binge eating disorder. So this is where I'm coming from. And yes, I want to do a photo shoot, but if at any point I feel that this is detrimental, I am stopping this shit. And I remember that quite clearly, because that was really important to me. And then the minute that I'd said that, I was like, cool, now we know, now we're on the same level of playing field. And now I know that if I ever highlight any concerns, I've already put that forward, and I know that I've created that space. So don't be scared as a client to be quite proactive with those things, to be able to feel comfortable expressing that to your coach. And honestly, if you feel like your coach isn't going to listen to you, that they're not going to give you that level of care, that they're not going to pay attention, that they're not going to try and educate themselves, that coach needs to fuck off out of your life. You need to stop paying them, and you need to either work alone or work with somebody else. Because genuinely, like, you hear this all the time, people who clearly are struggling, who are paying a coach money, that a coach is simply not giving them any level of care at all, not even the minimum, that they're not responding to their needs in any shape or form, because perhaps that coach doesn't know how to, but they're not even admitting that they don't know how to. And that's when that damage is created, because the longer someone spends with, in a disordered, with disordered eating behaviors, that can then become a clinical issue. And there's a lot of evidence to show that the longer that you have spent with a clinical eating disorder, the harder it is to recover fully from it. So the sooner we can see these things, the better, both for coaches and for clients. And that's all comes down to education. And it's okay not to know these things from the beginning, but it's important to be able to learn them and appraise them as we go.
I think it's a really good point to finish up on. With in regards to this or anything, as a coach, admitting that you don't know something is not a sign of weakness. In fact, it's probably just a sign to that client that you're staying true to what you know, you're staying in your lane, and you're not trying to bullshit someone. Right? I literally said this in a check-in this morning. They're in here watching. I said, listen, if this is a different issue, I said, there might come a point where we can't sort this, and I need to hold my hands up and say, I don't know what to do. I've exhausted all of my knowledge. I'm going to have to refer. I'm going to have to hire someone else or bring someone else in. I think it's a bad thing to say, but what I would say as a coach, go find out how to do it. Don't just say I don't know what to do and then just leave it. Say you know what to do. Find a solution, a way around it, so that next time you're presented with a similar sort of, I'm not going to call it a problem or an issue, but a similar sort of case scenario, you have a rough idea of how to go about it. But every single time this happens, which could be quite a lot, especially if you are a bodybuilding coach or a physique coach, it could happen, quite frequently over the course of the months, the years, and whatnot. But I guess everything gets kind of better over time. Ali, do you have anything else to add apart from the fact that you're wearing a shit hat and you've not had a shave today? You've probably not even had a shower.
So I was going to shave, but I've lost my charger. So, sorry, there's a question came through.
That's fine.
So personally, no. Depending on how your actual prep's going, like I'm sure Clara's been in prep for a long time. Like when Chloe prepped, she was in for a very long time. So if everything's done the right way, then I would say absolutely not. But I'm sure Clara would add into that.
Yeah, I just think that as long as I wouldn't don't worry about it. If these aren't things that you've experienced before, don't think too much into it. But the best thing that you can start doing is start to implement some strategies that are going to be supportive of you during your prep and also as you exit that prep stage. So for example, if you've got a bit more time now, maybe spending some time doing some mindful eating, slowing down your meals, paying attention to your self-talk, these types of things. If you start to implement that now, even if the dieting phase has been prolonged, that will mitigate that risk. And if you start to make sure that you are using things like positive self-affirmation or even doing gratitude in relation to your body, because obviously you'll spend a really long time focusing on your body, that's going to definitely help make the journey easier, minimize the risk if there is any risk for you specifically. But definitely, the fact that you've got more time is almost a blessing, because it means that you've got more time to implement these things, get really good at mindful eating, for example, get really good at being kind to yourself, listening to yourself when you're not being kind to yourself. And that just means that once you've finished that dieting phase, you've been doing that for however long. So coming out of that prep, even though it's been really long, it's going to be, to an extent much easier, because your mindset will be in a much better in a much kinder position. And the fact that you're already aware of these things, that you're attuned to them, that's putting you in such an advantaged position.
I think she's maybe asked that anecdotally, by the way, because I presume by the way she asked, it's not actually like that.
See, from a coaching standpoint, and I'll just be pretty brutally honest. If lockdown, like when lockdown happened, if your shoot was on the 12th of June, you were not struggling.
Do it now.
No, I'm just saying that if you were in June, which was 12 weeks ago, and you were 12 weeks out, you're not struggling. You're not body focused. It's not hard 12 weeks out, right? So if someone was 12 weeks out and lockdown happened, I would say, listen, we have no idea when this is potentially going to end. So what I'd recommend we do is we just go right back to maintenance, or we go right back in it again and face, let's shoot next year. The reason I say that, it happened, right? Ryan Campbell, God, she was actually 4 weeks out. Lockdown happened. We just reversed out. So many clients were 2 weeks out, 10 days out from shows, right? But if someone was supposed to be doing and they continued to diet to 6th of June, which was a week ago, because September's another 12 weeks away, right? So if you get ready, right, and you're at the point you're shoot ready now, you will not be able to maintain that for 12
Also, if you're shoot ready now, do your shoot now. I've got a client shooting in 2 weeks, so that's a different topic.
What I was saying was, as from a coaching perspective, what I would do, I'd revert it out, and I would, let's say, hypothetically, let's say shoot weight was like 50 kilos, right? I'd probably push up your calories, reduce your output, push you up to like 53, maybe 54, depending on the individual, right? Probably more for 52, 53. And I'd just hold you there, right? So I'd up and I'd get you to about 8 weeks out. So you'd have like a month dietary break, or maybe a 6 week dietary break, and then you just diet again. So the hard thing though is you have 6 weeks of effectively maintaining a leaner physique, which can be a little bit of a head fuck, which is that's when you can kind of get used to feeling smaller.
Yeah.
Becoming the norm. So those behaviours, perhaps, it's a good point to say, could they potentially?
They could, but anything that is mismanaged or that is not managed could grow arms and legs. It's about being aware of it. I think the first thing, awareness is the first step. Awareness, being comfortable with having those conversations, and then being proactive about it. If you know that there is a heightened risk through a prolonged dieting phase, what can you do about it? Actually, there are a lot of things that you can start doing now that you can start doing before you even start dieting. So be proactive. Don't panic. Don't be terrified by it. Because there are things that you can do that doesn't mean that just because you're at a heightened risk doesn't mean that you will develop these things. And if done appropriately and if managed appropriately, you'll be absolutely fine.
Right.
100%.
Okay, doke. What we would say is there are 20 people, include us, 20 people in the chat. If you could do us all a little favour, I will be putting this up on YouTube as of tomorrow. So if you want to re-watch it and whatnot, I will put the link in my link tree or whatnot. If not, it'll be on the YouTube channel. But for us today, if you please could take a selfie, we'll strike a pose.
Why is it always that pose?
If you take a little sort of photo for us, pop on Instagram, tag all three of us, and we'd much appreciate it. We just want to try and help as many people as we can do, and then just especially during such a critical period where gyms are shut. Listen, it fucking sucks, right? But there's light at the end of the tunnel, and potentially will be opening down in England a bit earlier than up here, which
fingers crossed. I also wanted to add, if anyone does actually want to have access to either the PowerPoint or any of the literature behind it, and you want to read a bit more into it, just let me know. Just send me a message on Instagram, and I'll be able to send that all to you. If you want to geek out, if not, that's fine. I won't take any offense. But if anyone is interested, just let me know. Yeah,
make sure you please ask Clara for those references and whatnot, because as you could tell, she's much more educated than me and Alex, especially Alex, and can speak in a language that we just cannot. So if you read any of our articles and whatnot on the website, they've been proofread by Clara. You'll know that me and Ali do not speak like that.
Cheers, guys. Thanks very much. Have a good night.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good evening.
See you later.